I can explain.
No explanations. No chances. No words.
The smell of burnt coffee and motor oil had become my cologne over the years, seeping into every fiber of my being at Eddie's Auto Detail and Security. At 3 in the morning, when sleep refused to come, I'd find myself here in my shop, tinkering with alarm systems or buffing out scratches that didn't really need my attention. Tonight was no different, except for the gnawing feeling in my gut that had been growing stronger each day. Sienna's third girls' night this week. That's what she'd called it when she kissed my cheek with those perfectly glossed lips and grabbed her designer gym bag. The same bag that now sat on my workbench, forgotten in her rush to meet whoever was more important than her husband of 8 years. "Eddie, you still here?" Ray's gravelly voice cut through my brooding. My mechanic and closest friend pushed through the shop's back door, wiping grease from his hands. "Man, you're going to wear a hole in that floor with all your pacing." "Can't sleep," I muttered, not looking up from the carburetor I'd been mindlessly cleaning for the past hour. "Sienna's out again." Ray snorted. "That woman's got more social events than a politician during election season. When's the last time she stayed home with you?" The question hit harder than intended. When was the last time? 2 weeks? 3? I'd stopped counting the empty dinners and cold beds. "She's just busy with work stuff." "Work stuff that requires designer dresses and enough perfume to choke a horse?" Ray grabbed a beer from the mini fridge, popping it open with a satisfying hiss. "Eddie, I've known you since we were both dodging bullets in the Middle East. You're many things, but stupid ain't one of them." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Sienna. "Running late tonight, don't wait up. Love you." The same message, word for word, that I'd received the past 3 nights. "You know what's funny?" I said, finally meeting Ray's concerned gaze, and I installed GPS tracking in her car last month. "For security," I told her, "in case it got stolen." Ray's eyebrows shot up. "And?" "Her car's been to places she's never mentioned. The Meridian Apartments downtown 3 times this week. That fancy rooftop bar on 5th Street. The Gold's Gym on the other side of town. Not the one she has a membership at." The words hung in the air like smoke from Ray's cigarette. He'd quit years ago, but stress had a way of bringing back old habits. "Maybe there's an explanation," Ray offered, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it any more than I did. That's when I noticed Sienna's gym bag again. She'd been so flustered leaving tonight, muttering about being late to meet Mel and the girls. In 8 years of marriage, Sienna had never forgotten anything. The woman had a memory like a steel trap and organizational skills that put military logistics to shame. "She left her bag," I said, more to myself than to Ray. "So, Sienna never forgets anything, ever." My hands moved without conscious thought, unzipping the leather bag. Inside, the usual suspects: designer water bottle, protein powder, yoga mat, wireless earbuds. But tucked into a side pocket, wrapped in a silk scarf, was something that made my blood run cold. A second phone. A cheap burner with a cracked screen protector. Ray whistled low. "Well, that's not ominous at all." The phone was still warm, recently used. With trembling fingers, I powered it on. No lock screen, no security. Either Sienna was getting sloppy or she never expected anyone to find it. The text messages loaded first. Pages and pages of conversations with someone listed as Z in the contacts. My eyes scanned the recent messages, each one feeling like a punch to the gut. Z, "Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful. Wear that black dress that drives me crazy." Sienna, already wearing it. "Eddie's working late again, as usual. Poor guy has no idea." Z, "His loss is my gain. Meet me at the usual spot in 20. Sienna, on my way. God, I feel so alive when I'm with you." The messages went back months. Months of lies, deception, and mockery. But it was the photos and videos that really destroyed me. Intimate moments between my wife and this Z character, taken in locations I recognized from her GPS logs. "Jesus Christ," Ray breathed, reading over my shoulder. "Eddie, I'm so sorry, man." I scrolled further, finding conversations between Sienna and her friend Mel. The same Mel who'd been coming to our house for dinner every Sunday for 3 years, who'd helped me plan Sienna's surprise birthday party, who'd looked me in the eye and called me one of the good ones. "Mel, how long are you going to keep this charade going? The poor guy worships you." "Sienna, until I figure out my next move. Eddie's stable, reliable, boring. Zane makes me feel like a woman again. But Eddie's got the house, the business, the savings account." "Mel, you're playing with fire, girl. What if he finds out?" "Sienna, he won't. Eddie sees what he wants to see. I could probably bring Zane home for dinner and Eddie would offer him a beer and ask about his workout routine. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the concrete floor. 8 years. 8 years of marriage, of building a life together, of believing in something that was apparently just an elaborate performance. "What are you going to do?" Ray asked quietly. I stared at the phone, my mind racing through possibilities. Confront her directly? Hire a divorce lawyer? Pack her bags and leave them on the front porch? All options that a reasonable, mature adult might consider. But as I sat there in my grimy shop, surrounded by the tools of my trade and the smell of honest work, I realized I wasn't feeling particularly reasonable or mature. I was feeling something much darker, much more primal. "You remember what you taught me about psychological warfare back in the service?" I asked Ray, my voice steady for the first time all night. Ray's eyes narrowed. "Eddie, whatever you're thinking, the best revenge isn't quick and violent. It's slow, methodical, and public. It's making sure everyone sees exactly who they really are." I picked up the burner phone, scrolling through more messages. Zane Carter, personal trainer at Elite Fitness downtown. 26 years old, according to his Instagram profile that Sienna had screenshot and sent to Mel with heart eye emojis. The kind of guy who took shirtless mirror selfies and called himself an entrepreneur while living in a studio apartment. "She thinks I'm blind," I murmured, screenshotting conversations and forwarding them to my own phone. "She thinks I'm some pathetic, oblivious husband who's too stupid to notice his wife is screwing a wannabe influencer. Maybe you should just..." "No." I stood up, pocketing the burner phone. "She wants to play games? She wants to laugh about how clueless I am? Fine. But she's about to learn that the quiet, boring husband she's been taking for granted isn't quite as stupid as she thinks." Ray stubbed out his cigarette, studying my face with the intensity of someone who'd seen me in combat situations. "What's the plan?" I smiled for the first time in weeks, though I suspected it wasn't a particularly pleasant expression. "I'm going to give her exactly what she deserves. Publicly, thoroughly, and with enough witnesses to make sure she never lives it down." The clock on the wall read 3:47 a.m. Somewhere across town, my wife was probably tangled up with her muscle-bound boy toy, laughing about her pathetic husband who worked too much and trusted too easily. She had no idea that her boring, predictable husband was about to become the most interesting thing that ever happened to her. The next morning arrived with the false normalcy that only comes after your entire world has shifted overnight. I'd managed maybe 2 hours of sleep before my alarm went off, but adrenaline and pure spite were proving to be excellent substitutes for rest. Sienna was already in the kitchen when I stumbled downstairs, perfectly put together as always. Designer yoga pants that probably cost more than most people's rent, a fitted top that showed off the results of her extensive gym routine, and that radiant smile that had once made my heart skip beats. Now it just made me nauseous. "Morning, honey," she chirped, not looking up from her phone as she sipped her organic green smoothie. "You were up late again. I barely heard you come to bed." The lie rolled off her tongue so effortlessly. I'd never come to bed at all, having spent the night on the couch in my home office, planning my next moves with the methodical precision of a military operation. "Yeah, had some paperwork to catch up on," I replied, pouring myself coffee from the pot she'd made. At least she still maintained the pretense of being a considerate wife. "How was girls' night?" "Oh, you know how it is with Mel and the crew. Lots of wine, lots of gossip, lots of complaining about our husbands." She laughed at her own joke, finally glancing up from her phone. "We went to that new place downtown, then ended up at Jules's apartment watching some terrible reality show." Another lie. According to the GPS logs I'd pulled from her car's system that morning, she'd spent exactly 47 minutes at the Meridian Apartments before heading to the Skyline rooftop bar. No stops at Jules's place, no girls' night, just my wife and her boyfriend playing house while I worked late to pay for her lifestyle. "Sounds fun," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm glad you're getting out and enjoying yourself." Sienna's expression softened, and for just a moment, I saw a flicker of something that might have been guilt. Or maybe it was just my imagination projecting emotions onto a woman who'd clearly become a stranger. "You should come out with us sometime," she said, reaching across the counter to squeeze my hand. "I know Mel's always asking about you, and Jules thinks you're hilarious." The casual mention of Mel sent a fresh wave of anger through my system. I'd read enough of their text conversations to know exactly what Mel thought of me. Poor Eddie. So sweet and clueless. Sienna's got him wrapped around her little finger. Maybe, I replied, gently pulling my hand away. Speaking of which, you left your gym bag at the shop yesterday. It's in my truck if you need it. I watched her face carefully, looking for any sign of panic or concern, but Sienna was better at this game than I'd given her credit for. She just nodded absently, already turning her attention back to her phone. Thanks, babe. I've got my backup bag in the car, so no rush. Of course she did. Sienna always had a backup plan, a contingency for every situation, except she'd never planned for her husband to start paying attention. After she left for work, I spent an hour going through our shared computer, our bank statements, our phone records. The picture that emerged was both infuriating and pathetic. Charges at expensive restaurants I'd never been to, always for 2 people. Hotel rooms booked during her business trips that never appeared on her work calendar. Cash withdrawals from our joint account, always in round numbers, always on days when she'd mentioned meeting friends. But the real goldmine was her cloud storage account, which she'd apparently forgotten was linked to our home computer. Photos, videos, and documents that painted a clear picture of a woman living a double life with impressive dedication. There were pictures of Zane Carter that she'd taken herself. The guy working out, flexing in mirrors, posing by his white Jeep Wrangler with custom rims and a lift kit that screamed midlife crisis at 26. There were screenshots of their conversations, saved like love letters from a teenager's first crush. And there were videos that I deleted immediately, not because they hurt, though they did, but because some things couldn't be unseen. My phone rang, interrupting my digital archaeology expedition. Ray's name flashed on the screen. Please tell me you didn't do anything stupid last night, he said without preamble. Define stupid. Eddie, I'm serious. I've seen that look before. Back when we were deployed. You're in full tactical mode, and that never ended well for whoever was on the receiving end. I leaned back in my desk chair, staring at the evidence of my wife's betrayal spread across multiple browser windows. I'm not going to hurt anyone, Ray, at least not physically. That's not as reassuring as you think it is. I need your help with something, I continued, ignoring his concern. You still got contacts in the tech world? People who know about surveillance equipment, digital forensics, that kind of thing? Ray was quiet for a long moment. What exactly are you planning? Nothing illegal, nothing violent. I just want to make sure I have all the facts before I make any decisions about my marriage. Eddie, she's been cheating on me for months, Ray. Maybe longer. With some Instagram fitness model who probably has more followers than brain cells. And her friends have been helping her, covering for her, laughing about what a pathetic fool I am. The words came out harder than I'd intended, carrying all the hurt and rage I'd been bottling up since finding that burner phone. All right, Ray said finally. I know a guy. Used to do corporate security before he went freelance. He can set you up with whatever you need, no questions asked. But Eddie, promise me you'll think this through. Whatever you're planning, once you start down this road, there's no going back. There's already no going back, I replied. She made sure of that the moment she decided to make me the punchline of her secret life. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the morning researching Zane Carter and his world. Social media made it embarrassingly easy to learn everything about someone's life, especially someone as narcissistic as my wife's boyfriend. Elite Fitness downtown, where he worked as a senior personal trainer and lifestyle coach. A studio apartment in the Meridian complex that he shared with 2 roommates, despite being nearly 30 years old. A side business selling supplements and workout plans to gullible teenagers. And a social media presence that was equal parts inspiring and nauseating, full of motivational quotes overlaid on shirtless photos and videos of him deadlifting while staring intensely into the camera. The guy was a walking cliché, the kind of person who unironically used hashtags like #blessed and #grindneverstops. But what really caught my attention were the comments on his posts, particularly the ones from women. Dozens of them, all variations of the same theme. You're so hot. Wish I could work out with you. My husband could never look like that. And there, mixed in with the desperate housewives and gym groupies, were comments from my wife. Not under her real name, of course. She used the handle @SiennaFitness, as if she were some kind of influencer herself. Heart eye emojis, fire symbols, and comments like, looking good, trainer, and can't wait for our next session. The whole thing was so juvenile, so pathetically obvious, that I almost felt embarrassed for her. Almost. My phone buzzed with a text from Sienna. Working late tonight, probably won't be home until after 10. Order yourself some dinner, love you. I checked the time, 2:17 p.m. She was already setting up tonight's alibi, probably coordinating with Zane to make sure their stories aligned. The efficiency of it was almost admirable, in a sociopathic kind of way. But two could play the planning game. And unlike my wife, I'd learned my strategic thinking from people whose lives depended on getting it right the first time. I opened a new browser window and started researching Elite Fitness, its hours of operation, its layout, its staff schedule. Then I pulled up the GPS tracking data from Sienna's car and began mapping out her routine, her patterns, her habits. If she wanted to treat our marriage like a military campaign, complete with deception, misdirection, and intelligence gathering, then I'd show her what a real campaign looked like. The afternoon flew by as I planned and prepared, making lists and contingencies with the same attention to detail I'd once applied to mission briefings. By the time evening rolled around, I had a comprehensive understanding of my target's operations, their weaknesses, and their vulnerabilities. Sienna thought she was playing chess while I played checkers. She was about to discover that I'd been playing a completely different game altogether. Thursday evening, 7:30 p.m. According to Sienna's carefully constructed alibi, she was having dinner with Jules to discuss some work project. According to her car's GPS, she was parked outside Elite Fitness, probably getting her training session with Zane, before they moved on to whatever upscale restaurant he'd convinced her to pay for. I sat in my truck across the street from the gym, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses like some discount private investigator. The whole situation would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetic. A grown man spying on his own wife because she'd turned their marriage into an elaborate lie. Ray had come through with the surveillance equipment, no questions asked. A listening device smaller than a quarter, magnetic GPS trackers, and a device that could clone phone signals within a 30-foot radius. All legal to own, according to my new tech-savvy friend, though their applications existed in various shades of gray. "You sure about this?" Ray had asked when he'd dropped off the gear that afternoon. "Once you start collecting evidence, you can't pretend you don't know what you know." "I already know what I know," I'd replied. "Now I just need proof that'll hold up in court." But sitting there, watching the entrance to Elite Fitness, I realized this wasn't really about divorce proceedings or legal evidence. This was about something much more primitive. The need to see the truth with my own eyes, to understand exactly how thoroughly I'd been betrayed. At 7:47 p.m., Sienna emerged from the gym's front entrance. She'd changed out of her work clothes into a black dress that I recognized from our anniversary dinner last year. The same dress she'd worn when she'd told me I was the most important thing in her life, that she couldn't imagine being with anyone else. She wasn't alone. Zane Carter looked exactly like his social media photos, which was somehow both impressive and deeply irritating. Tall, muscled, with the kind of artificially white smile that suggested either excellent genetics or expensive dental work. He had his hand on the small of Sienna's back as they walked toward his white Jeep, the casual intimacy of the gesture making my stomach clench. But what really got to me was the way Sienna looked at him. Bright, animated, laughing at something he'd said with genuine delight. It was an expression I hadn't seen on her face in months, maybe years. When had she stopped looking at me like that? When had I become the obligation instead of the joy? They drove off toward downtown, and I followed at a distance, feeling like a character in some noir film where everyone's motivations were suspect and nothing was quite what it seemed. The GPS tracker I'd placed on Sienna's car that morning made the tale unnecessary, but I needed to see this for myself. They ended up at Chez Laurent, the French restaurant where Sienna and I had had our first anniversary dinner, the same place where she'd ordered the duck confit and told me about her dreams of traveling through Europe, of seeing the world together once we'd saved enough money. I parked across the street and watched them through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows. They sat at a corner table, intimate and secluded, sharing appetizers and laughing like teenagers on a first date. Zane reached across the table to touch her hand, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her palm up to intertwine their fingers, a gesture so natural it was clear they'd done it 100 times before. My phone buzzed. A text from Sienna. "Dinner's running long. Jules is having a crisis about her presentation tomorrow. Don't wait up if you're tired." The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. She was sitting 50 yards away from me, holding hands with another man, and texting me lies without a trace of guilt or hesitation. I activated the listening device Ray had given me, a high-tech piece of equipment that could pick up conversations through windows if you knew how to position it correctly. The audio was fuzzy at first, but after a few adjustments, their voices came through clearly. "Can't keep doing this forever," Zane was saying, his voice carrying the kind of artificial confidence that came from too much time spent in front of mirrors. I mean, I care about you, Sienna, but this sneaking around is getting old. I know, baby, Sienna replied. And the pet name hit me like a physical blow. I just need a little more time to figure things out. Eddie's not a bad guy. He's not you. What's that supposed to mean? He's safe, predictable. He comes home every night, pays the bills, never asks for anything more than dinner and the occasional weekend movie. But he doesn't challenge me, you know? He doesn't make me feel alive. Zane leaned back in his chair, and even from across the street, I could see his smug expression. And I do? God, yes. You make me remember who I was before I became someone's wife. When I'm with you, I feel like I'm 25 again, like anything's possible. So leave him. The blunt statement hung in the air between them. Sienna took a long sip of her wine before responding. It's complicated. The house is in both our names, and his business is doing really well. If I just walk away, I'll lose everything I've worked for. So this is about money? It's about security, Sienna corrected. I've spent 8 years building a life with Eddie. I can't just throw that away without a plan. Zane's laugh was bitter. Right, so I'm good enough to screw around with, but not good enough to build a life with. That's not what I meant. No, I get it. I'm the exciting side piece. And he's the stable provider. Very traditional of you. The conversation was deteriorating rapidly, and I found myself oddly invested in their relationship drama. Part of me wanted Zane to walk away, to spare me the continued humiliation of my wife's affair. But a larger part wanted him to push harder, to force Sienna into a corner where she'd have to make a choice. You know what? Zane stood up abruptly, tossing his napkin onto the table. Figure out what you want, Sienna. But I'm not going to keep being your dirty little secret while you play house with your boring husband. He stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Sienna sitting alone at the table with a shocked expression that would have been comical under different circumstances. She sat there for several minutes, apparently processing what had just happened, before pulling out her phone. I watched her type rapidly, probably trying to smooth things over with her boyfriend. Then she called for the check, paid with what I knew was our joint credit card, and walked outside with the determined stride of someone who'd just made an important decision. Instead of going home, she drove to the Meridian Apartments, Zane's building. Apparently, whatever decision she'd made involved not letting their fight end the evening. I followed her into the parking garage, staying far enough back to avoid detection. She parked next to the white Jeep and sat in her car for a few minutes, probably gathering her courage or practicing her apology. Then she got out and walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking against the concrete with purposeful determination. This was it. The moment where I could either go home and pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen or commit fully to whatever path I'd started down when I'd found that burner phone. I thought about Ray's warning. Once you start down this road, there's no going back. Then I thought about Sienna's words. Eddie's not a bad guy. He's not you. I got out of my truck and followed my wife into her boyfriend's building. The elevator directory showed Z. Carter in apartment 4B. I took the stairs, partly for stealth and partly because I needed the physical activity to burn off some of the adrenaline coursing through my system. By the time I reached the 4th floor, I could hear voices from the end of the hallway. Sorry, okay? I didn't mean for it to sound like that. Sienna's voice muffled through the apartment door, but clearly audible in the quiet hallway. Then what did you mean? Zane's response was clearer, suggesting he was closer to the door. I meant that I'm trying to figure out how to be with you without destroying my entire life in the process. Maybe your life needs destroying. There was a long pause, then the sound of movement, footsteps, what might have been an embrace. I love you, Sienna said, and the words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I love you, and I want to be with you, but I need time to do this right. How much time? 6 months, maybe less. I'll talk to a lawyer, figure out the financial stuff, and then I'll tell Eddie everything. Another pause, then Zane's voice, softer now. You promise? I promise. I'd heard enough, more than enough. I walked back down the hallway on unsteady legs, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd just learned. Sienna wasn't just having an affair, she was planning to leave me, and she was going to string me along for another 6 months, while she positioned herself to take half of everything I'd worked for. The ride home passed in a blur of rage and disbelief. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I'd made several important decisions. First, Sienna was never going to get the chance to execute her carefully planned exit strategy. Second, if she wanted to play games with people's lives, she was going to learn what it felt like to be on the losing side. And third, Zane Carter was about to discover that some husbands weren't quite as boring and predictable as they appeared. I spent the rest of the evening in my home office, researching divorce law, asset protection, and the various ways a person could make life very uncomfortable for someone who would decide to treat them as expendable. Sienna came home at 11:30 p.m., full of apologies about Jules and her work crisis, bubbling with fake concern about whether I'd eaten dinner and how my day had gone. I smiled and nodded and played the role of the oblivious husband, all while planning the systematic destruction of the life she thought she was so cleverly manipulating. She had 6 months, she told her boyfriend. I was going to give her 6 days. Friday morning brought the kind of crisp autumn weather that usually made me appreciate living in our small East Coast town. Today, it just felt like the perfect backdrop for what was about to become a very public unraveling. Sienna had left early for work, claiming she had a breakfast meeting with potential clients. According to the GPS tracker on her car, she'd actually driven straight to Elite Fitness for what I assumed was a reconciliation session with Zane. The predictability of it would have been boring if it weren't so useful for my purposes. Ray arrived at my shop at 8 a.m. sharp, carrying coffee and the kind of grim expression that suggested he knew he was about to become an accessory to something morally questionable. "You look like heck," he observed, handing me a cup of coffee that smelled like salvation. "Didn't sleep much," I admitted. "Spent most of the night planning." "Planning what exactly?" I pulled up the surveillance photos on my laptop. Sienna and Zane at the restaurant, walking into his apartment building, the timestamp showing exactly how long she'd stayed. Then I showed him the bank records, the credit card charges, the pattern of lies that painted a clear picture of systematic deception. "Jesus," Ray whistled. "She's been busy. For months, maybe longer." I took a sip of coffee, feeling the caffeine hit my system like a pills. But here's the thing. She's gotten sloppy, overconfident. She thinks I'm so pathetic and oblivious that she doesn't need to be careful anymore. And you're going to prove her wrong. I'm going to prove her very, very wrong. Ray studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd served in combat zones with me. "What's the first move?" I smiled, and Ray actually took a step back. "Today's Friday. Tonight, Sienna's supposed to be at her book club, the one that meets at Barnes & Noble, every other week to discuss whatever Oprah's recommending these days. Let me guess. There is no book club." "Oh, there's a book club. Mel actually does organize it, and Sienna did attend for the first few months. But according to her GPS logs, she hasn't been to a book club meeting in over 2 months. Instead, she's been using those Friday nights for extended dates with Zane." Ray was starting to grin. "And you're going to crash the party. Better than that. I'm going to make sure everyone at the actual book club knows exactly where Sienna really spends her Friday evenings." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Mel's book club was a social institution in our town, attended by wives, girlfriends, and single women who treated it as much as a gossip session as a literary discussion. These were the same women who knew everyone's business, who formed the backbone of our community's social network, and who had the collective power to destroy someone's reputation with surgical precision. At 6 p.m., I walked into Barnes & Noble, carrying a manila envelope and wearing my most concerned husband expression. The book club was easy to spot. 12 women clustered around a table in the cafe area, discussing what appeared to be a romance novel with an embarrassingly shirtless man on the cover. Mel saw me first, her face lighting up with surprise and what might have been guilt. "Eddie, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" The entire table turned to look at me, and I could see the wheels turning in their collective minds. Why was Sienna's husband here, when Sienna clearly wasn't? "I'm looking for Sienna," I said, loud enough for the entire group to hear. "She left her work laptop at home, and she's got that big presentation on Monday. I figured I'd drop it off since I know how important book club is to her." The silence that followed was deafening. Several women exchanged glances, and I could see Mel's face going through a complicated series of expressions as she tried to figure out how to handle the situation. Mel said finally, "Sienna's not here tonight, Eddie. She said she had to work late on that presentation you mentioned." "Really?" I let confusion and concern creep into my voice. "That's weird. She specifically told me she was coming to book club. Said you guys were discussing that new thriller everyone's been talking about." Jules, Sienna's work friend and apparent co-conspirator, jumped in to help. "Maybe she got held up at the office?" You know how these client presentations can be. Maybe, I agreed. It's just strange. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail, and when I called her office, they said she left at 4:30. The tension around the table was thick enough to cut with a knife. These women might not have known the specific details of Sienna's affair, but they clearly knew something was wrong with the story they were being asked to support. "I'm sure there's an explanation," Mel said weakly. "I'm sure there is too," I replied, pulling out my phone. "You know what? Let me try calling her one more time, just to make sure she's okay." I dialed Sienna's number and put the phone on speaker. It rang twice before she answered, and I could hear music and conversation in the background. Clearly not the quiet environment of an office building after hours. "Hey, honey." Sienna's voice came through clearly, slightly breathless and obviously distracted. "What's up?" "Hi, babe. I just wanted to drop off your laptop since you forgot it. I'm at Barnes & Noble, but Mel says you're not here." The pause that followed was long enough for everyone at the table to understand exactly what was happening. Oh crap," Sienna said, apparently forgetting the phone was still connected. Yeah, I had to skip book club tonight. Work emergency, you know how it is." In the background, a male voice, clearly Zane, called out, "Babe, you coming back? The movie's about to start." Another pause, this one even longer and more damning. "Eddie, I can explain." I hung up the phone and looked around the table at 12 women who now knew, without a doubt, that Sienna Rollins was lying to her husband about her Friday night activities. "Well," I said with a sad smile, "I guess that explains where she really is." The explosion of whispered conversation started before I'd even left the building. By the time I reached my truck, I could see several women already pulling out their phones, probably texting friends and family members with the juiciest piece of gossip they'd encountered in months. My phone started ringing before I'd even started the engine. Sienna's name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. Finally, I answered. "Eddie, I can explain everything," she said immediately, her voice high with panic. "It's not what you think." "What do I think, Sienna?" I don't know, but whatever you're thinking, you're wrong. Zane is just a friend. We were just..." "Watching a movie?" "Yes, exactly. Just as friends. His roommate's girlfriend wanted to double date, but it's not romantic or anything." The lies were getting more elaborate and desperate by the minute. "Okay," I said calmly. "I believe you. You do? Of course, you're my wife. If you say you're just friends with Zane, then you're just friends with Zane." The relief in her voice was palpable. "Oh, thank God. Eddie, I was so worried you'd think something was going on, but I swear on my mother's grave, it's completely innocent. I know, honey. Come home when you're ready. I love you. I love you too." I hung up the phone and smiled. Sienna thought she'd successfully talked her way out of trouble, which meant she'd continue her evening with Zane, probably celebrating how easily she'd manipulated her stupid, trusting husband. She had no idea that 12 of the biggest gossips in town now had concrete evidence of her deception, or that by tomorrow morning, half the community would know that Sienna Rollins was cheating on her husband with some muscle-bound trainer from the gym. More importantly, she had no idea that her boring, predictable husband had just fired the opening move in a war she didn't even know she was fighting. My phone buzzed with a text from Ray. "How'd it go?" I typed back, "Phase 1 complete. Tomorrow we move to Phase 2. "What's Phase 2? I looked at the manila envelope sitting on my passenger seat, filled with printed screenshots of Sienna's secret social media conversations, her GPS logs, and photos of her and Zane together. Evidence that would soon find its way to some very interested parties. "Phase 2 is when things get really interesting," I replied. Then I drove home to wait for my wife to return from her innocent movie night with her friend Zane, already planning the next step in what was going to be the most educational experience of her life. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of artificial normalcy that felt like the calm before a hurricane. Sienna had come home around midnight, full of nervous energy and overly detailed explanations about the innocent movie she'd watched with her friend Zane and his roommate's girlfriend, who apparently didn't exist. I'd played the role of the understanding husband perfectly, nodding at appropriate moments and asking just enough questions to make her elaborate on her lies. By the time she'd finished her performance, she'd constructed such a complex web of fiction that she'd probably need a flowchart to keep track of it all. "I'm so glad you understand," she'd said, curling up against me in bed with what seemed like genuine relief. "I was worried you'd be upset about me having male friends." "Why would I be upset about that?" I'd replied, stroking her hair with the same hand that had been holding surveillance photos of her and her friend a few hours earlier. I trust you completely. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Now, watching her get ready for her Saturday morning yoga class, another recent addition to her schedule that I was certain had nothing to do with downward-facing dogs, I marveled at her ability to compartmentalize. She was humming while she packed her gym bag, apparently having convinced herself that last night's close call was just a minor hiccup in her carefully orchestrated double life. I'll probably grab lunch with the girls after class, she said, not meeting my eyes in the mirror, as she applied lipstick with surgical precision. Jules mentioned wanting to try that new sushi place downtown. According to her GPS logs, Saturday afternoons were usually spent at Zane's apartment, probably making up for the interrupted evening. The sushi restaurant was just another prop in her elaborate theater production. Sounds great, I said, kissing her cheek. I've got some work to catch up on at the shop anyway. After she left, I spent an hour going through the responses to last night's public revelation. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since dawn with text messages from friends, neighbors, and acquaintances who'd heard about the book club incident through the town's incredibly efficient gossip network. Heard about last night, man, you okay? From Mike, who ran the hardware store. If you need anything, we're here for you. From Sarah, our next-door neighbor. That witch, I always thought she was too good for her own good. From Mrs. Donnelly, our 70-year-old neighbor who'd apparently never liked Sienna anyway. The last message was from Mel, and it was a masterpiece of guilty conscience. Eddie, I'm so sorry about last night. I had no idea Sienna was... I don't want to get involved, but if you need someone to talk to... Perfect. Mel was feeling guilty, which meant she was ready to be helpful. I called her back immediately. Oh, Eddie, she said, answering on the first ring. I've been feeling terrible about last night. I should have said something sooner, but I didn't know how to... It's okay, Mel. I'm not angry with you. You're not? Of course not. You were trying to be a good friend to Sienna. I understand that. The relief in her voice was audible. I just feel so caught in the middle, you know? I care about both of you, and this whole situation is just awful. Can I ask you something? I said, letting vulnerability creep into my voice. How long have you known? A long pause. Known what exactly? About Sienna and Zane. Another pause. Longer this time. Eddie, please, Mel. I'm not going to get mad, and I'm not going to blame you. I just need to understand what's been happening. A few months, she admitted finally. She swore it was just a friendship at first. Then she said it was just a physical thing, nothing serious. She kept saying she was going to end it, that it didn't mean anything. But it did mean something. I think she's in love with him, Eddie. And I think she's been trying to figure out how to leave you without looking like the bad guy. The confirmation of what I'd already suspected still hit like a punch to the gut. Did she ask you to cover for her? Sometimes. The book club thing, a few work events that she wasn't actually attending. I kept telling her she was going to get caught, but she said you trusted her completely and would never question her. She was right about that, I said bitterly. Until now. What are you going to do? It was the question everyone was asking, and I had a very specific answer in mind. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who they're really dealing with, I said. Sienna spent months making me look like a fool. Now it's her turn. After hanging up with Mel, I drove to Elite Fitness. Not to confront anyone or cause a scene, but to gather intelligence and plant a few seeds that would grow into something much more devastating than a simple confrontation. The gym was busy with the Saturday morning crowd. Serious fitness enthusiasts mixed with weekend warriors trying to undo a week's worth of poor dietary choices. I signed up for a day pass and spent an hour working out, listening to conversations and observing the social dynamics. Zane was easy to spot, holding court near the free weights with a group of admirers who hung on his every word about proper form and supplement choices. He was exactly as obnoxious in person as I'd expected, loud, self-absorbed, and completely convinced of his own importance. But what interested me more were the other trainers, particularly a woman named Jessica, who seemed to be watching Zane with barely concealed irritation. During a break between sets, I struck up a conversation with her. That guy's pretty popular, I observed, nodding toward Zane. Jessica rolled her eyes. Zane thinks he's God's gift to fitness. Half his clients are middle-aged women who are paying him to flirt with them more than to actually train them. Sounds like good business. It's unprofessional, she said firmly. Some of us actually take this job seriously, But guys like him give the whole industry a bad reputation. How so? He's sleeping with at least 3 of his clients that I know of. Married women, mostly. Management doesn't care because he brings in money, but it's going to blow up eventually. I raised an eyebrow. 3 clients? At least. There's this blonde who comes in Friday mornings, always wearing designer workout clothes and too much makeup for the gym. Then there's the redhead who books private sessions every Tuesday evening. And there's another one, brunette, always showing up right when his shift ends. The brunette was obviously Sienna, but the existence of other women added an interesting wrinkle to the situation. Sounds like a soap opera, I said. More like a disaster waiting to happen. These women think they're special, but Zane's just collecting trophies. Eventually, they're all going to figure out they're not the only one, and when that happens... She didn't need to finish the sentence. I could imagine the explosion that would result when Zane's harem discovered each other's existence. Thanks for the warning, I said. I'll make sure to steer clear of the drama. Smart man. I finished my workout and left the gym with a much clearer understanding of the situation. Sienna wasn't just cheating on me. She was one of multiple women being manipulated by a serial philanderer who saw married women as easy targets for his ego and his wallet. The revelation should have made me feel better, but instead it just made me angrier. My wife had blown up our marriage for a guy who was running the same game on 6 other women. That afternoon, while Sienna was supposedly having sushi with Jules, I paid a visit to Detective Arlo, my old army buddy, who now worked for the local police department. Eddie, he said, greeting me with a firm handshake and a concerned expression. Heard through the grapevine that you're having some domestic troubles. News travels fast in this town, especially when it involves public scenes at book clubs, he said with a wry smile. You want to talk about it? I showed him some of the evidence I'd gathered, the GPS logs, the financial records, the photographic proof of Sienna's affair. Arlo studied everything with the methodical attention of a professional investigator. This is pretty comprehensive, he said finally. You thinking about divorce proceedings? Maybe, but first, I want to make sure I understand the full scope of what I'm dealing with. What do you mean? I told him about my conversation with Jessica, about Zane's apparent pattern of targeting married clients, about the multiple women who thought they were his only extramarital conquest. Arlo's expression darkened. You think your wife's just one of several? I think my wife's been played by a professional, and I think she's too proud to admit it. So what's your plan? I smiled, and Arlo actually leaned back in his chair. I'm going to make sure all of Zane's clients meet each other, I said, and I'm going to make sure it happens in the most public, humiliating way possible. Eddie, you need to be careful. Whatever you're planning, make sure it stays legal. Oh, it'll be completely legal, I assured him, but it definitely won't be pretty. As I drove home, I felt the pieces of my plan clicking into place with satisfying precision. Sienna thought she was in control of the situation, managing her double life with careful planning and strategic deception. She was about to learn that her boring, predictable husband had been planning something much more elaborate and much more devastating than she could have ever imagined. The war was just getting started. Sunday morning brought the kind of crisp, clear weather that made everything seem possible. Sienna was still asleep when I got up, exhausted from what she'd claimed was a late night helping Jules with her presentation, but had actually been another extended session with Zane at his apartment. I'd spent most of Saturday night finalizing the details of what Ray had started calling Operation Humiliation, though I preferred to think of it as Operation Education. By the time Sienna woke up, I'd already been working for 3 hours, making phone calls and sending carefully crafted messages to a very specific group of people. Morning, honey, Sienna said, padding into the kitchen in her silk pajamas and looking genuinely beautiful despite everything. It was moments like this that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place, which somehow made the betrayal even more painful. Morning, I replied, handing her a cup of coffee prepared exactly the way she liked it. Sleep well? Like a baby. Jules and I were up until almost 2 working on her presentation, but I think we finally got it sorted out. Another lie delivered with the casual confidence of someone who'd had months of practice. According to the GPS tracker, she'd been at Zane's apartment until 1:47 a.m., which meant she'd probably rushed home and slipped into bed while I was pretending to sleep. That's great, I said. I'm sure she appreciates having such a dedicated friend. Sienna smiled and kissed my cheek, apparently missing the irony in my statement. What are your plans for today? Actually, I was thinking we should do something together. It feels like we haven't spent quality time in weeks. Her face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, guilt, calculation, and finally resignation. That sounds wonderful, but I already made plans with the girls. We're doing that new escape room downtown, then probably grabbing dinner somewhere. Of course she was. Sunday afternoons had become another regular slot in her schedule with Zane, usually involving extended dates that she covered with increasingly elaborate group activities that never seemed to include any actual groups. Rain check then? I asked, letting just a hint of disappointment creep into my voice. Definitely. Maybe next weekend? Sure thing. After she left, I spent an hour double-checking my preparations. The anonymous messages had been sent to Jessica and 2 other elite fitness trainers, along with several gym members who'd expressed frustration with Zane's unprofessional behavior. The messages were simple and factual. Zane Carter was conducting inappropriate relationships with multiple married clients, and anyone who wanted to see proof should be at the Skyline rooftop bar at 6 p.m. I'd also sent more detailed information to the 3 women Jessica had identified as Zane's current targets: the blonde, the redhead, and my wife, though I'd been more subtle with Sienna's invitation, using her friend Jules' name and suggesting a girls' night out to celebrate finishing the big presentation. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. Everyone would show up expecting different things, but they'd all get the same education about exactly who they were dealing with. Ray arrived at my shop around noon, carrying lunch and wearing the expression of someone who'd resigned himself to being an accessory to whatever chaos was about to unfold. "You sure about this?" he asked, unpacking sandwiches and chips. "Once you pull this trigger, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure," I replied, though my stomach was churning with nervous energy. Sienna's made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences. "And what about you? What happens after tonight?" It was a good question, one I'd been avoiding thinking about too deeply. After tonight, my marriage would be over in all but legal terms. My wife would hate me. Half the town would be talking about us. And I'd have to figure out how to rebuild my life from scratch. "I'll deal with that tomorrow," I said. "Tonight is about making sure everyone knows the truth." At 5:30 p.m., I positioned myself across the street from the Skyline rooftop bar with a clear view of the entrance and a high-powered camera with a telephoto lens. Ray was stationed inside the bar, nursing a beer and keeping an eye on the developing situation. The first to arrive was Jessica, the trainer from Elite Fitness, along with 2 other gym employees I recognized from my reconnaissance visits. They looked curious and slightly suspicious, probably wondering if they were about to witness some kind of professional misconduct hearing. Next came the blonde, a woman in her 40s with the kind of artificially perfect appearance that screamed desperate housewife. She was dressed to end and checking her phone constantly, obviously expecting to meet someone specific. The redhead arrived 10 minutes later, also overdressed and overmade up, scanning the crowd with the predatory intensity of someone who thought she was about to claim her territory. Then came Sienna, looking confused and slightly annoyed as she searched for Jules, who obviously wasn't there and never had been. She was wearing the black dress again, the one that had become her uniform for dates with Zane. And finally, right on schedule, Zane himself strutted through the entrance like he owned the place, wearing a tight shirt that showed off his gym-sculpted physique and an expression of supreme confidence that was about to be thoroughly shattered. My phone buzzed with a text from Ray. "Everyone's here. This is going to be ugly." I watched through the bar's floor-to-ceiling windows as the various parties began to notice each other. Zane spotted the blonde first and walked over with his trademark cocky smile, probably assuming she'd arranged some kind of surprise for him. The blonde's face lit up when she saw him, but her expression quickly changed to confusion when she noticed the redhead approaching from the other direction with the same possessive energy. Sienna, meanwhile, had given up looking for Jules and was heading toward the exit when she spotted Zane across the room. Her face went through a series of emotions: surprise, pleasure, and then growing alarm as she realized he was with other women. The trainers from Elite Fitness were watching the whole scene unfold, with the fascinated horror of people witnessing a car accident in slow motion. That's when I decided it was time to make my entrance. I walked into the bar carrying a manila envelope and wearing the expression of a man who'd finally run out of patience with other people's games. The hostess tried to seat me, but I walked straight to the center of the developing drama. "Evening, everyone," I said loudly enough to get the attention of not just my targets, but half the bar. "I think we all need to have a conversation." Sienna's face went white. Eddie? What are you doing here? I'm here to make sure everyone has all the facts, I replied, opening the manila envelope and pulling out printed photographs. Zane, I'd like you to meet some of your biggest fans. I handed a photo to the blonde, a surveillance shot of Zane and the redhead entering his apartment building together. Then I handed a photo to the redhead, Zane and the blonde in a passionate embrace outside the gym. And finally, I handed a photo to Sienna, her and Zane at the French restaurant, holding hands across the table like lovesick teenagers. Ladies, I said, addressing the three women who were staring at the photographs with growing horror, I'd like you to meet your boyfriend's other girlfriends. The explosion was immediate and spectacular. The blonde started screaming at Zane about lies and promises. The redhead threw her drink in his face and called him every name in the book. And Sienna just stood there, frozen, as the full scope of her humiliation became clear. You son of a witch, Zane snarled at me, wiping wine from his face. You have no idea what you've just done. I know exactly what I've done, I replied calmly. I've made sure everyone knows exactly who they're dealing with. Eddie, please, Sienna said, finally finding her voice. Can we talk about this privately? We had 8 years to talk privately, I said. You chose to have your conversations with Zane instead. The scene was drawing attention from everyone in the bar. Phones were coming out to record the drama, and I could see the trainers from Elite Fitness taking notes that would undoubtedly make their way back to gym management. You're going to regret this, Zane said, stepping closer with what I assumed was supposed to be an intimidating posture. The only thing I regret, I replied, not backing down, is not doing this months ago. That's when Zane made the mistake of putting his hands on me, grabbing my shirt and trying to use his size advantage to intimidate me into backing down. What he didn't know was that I'd spent years learning how to handle people who thought physical intimidation was a substitute for intelligence. I didn't hit him. I didn't need to. I simply stepped aside, used his own momentum against him, and watched as he stumbled backward into a table full of drinks, sending glasses crashing to the floor and covering himself in alcohol and ice. The bar erupted in cheers and applause. Phones captured every moment, and Zane lay on the floor in a puddle of spilled drinks, his carefully cultivated image destroyed as thoroughly as his relationships. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced to the crowd, I'd like you to meet Zane Carter, personal trainer and professional liar. He's been running a side business, seducing married women while telling each one she's special. Tonight, they all got to meet each other. The three women were still processing the revelation, but the crowd was eating it up. This was the kind of small-town drama that would be talked about for years. I turned to Sienna, who was crying and trying to disappear into the crowd. Your things will be packed and waiting on the front porch, I said quietly. The locks have already been changed. Eddie, please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. You made your choice months ago. Now you get to live with it. I walked out of the bar to the sound of continued chaos, Zane trying to salvage his reputation, the three women comparing notes on his deception, and the crowd enjoying the best entertainment they'd seen in years. Ray met me outside, shaking his head with what might have been admiration. Well, he said, that was definitely thorough. It was necessary, I replied, feeling oddly calm despite the magnitude of what had just happened. What now? I looked back at the bar, where the drama was still unfolding, then at my phone, which was already buzzing with messages from people who'd heard about the confrontation. Now I go home and start figuring out what the rest of my life looks like, I said. Any regrets? I thought about Sienna probably crying in her car and trying to figure out how to explain this to her friends and family. I thought about Zane, whose reputation and business were probably destroyed beyond repair. I thought about the three women who'd learned the hard way that they weren't as special as they'd believed. No, I said finally. No regrets at all.